Hello everybody, this is Bhante Joe here, and I'm just here in the shrine room at Badeka Vihari, which is the monastery we're staying at in Sri Lanka, and thought to record a short Dhamma discussion for the internet. So I thought that maybe could start with just a little bit of meditation, so maybe we can lean forward a little bit and arch the spine, and look about 3 feet in front, and close our eyes. And we can focus in on the breath. Can know when it's coming in, and know when it's going out. If one breathes in a long breath, can just know, I'm breathing in a long breath. And if one breathes in a short breath, can just know, I'm breathing in a short breath. And we can focus in on the breath at the tip of the nose. And if notice any patterns of tension or tightness around the nose, around the face, you can just let those relax. And can focus in on the breath at the tip of the nose. And when watching the breath at the tip of the nose, can be good to try to make mindfulness as continuous as possible. Being aware of the breath all the way through the in-breath. As the in-breath turns to the out-breath, all the way through the out-breath. And then as the out-breath turns back to the in-breath again. Trying to keep mindfulness as continuous as possible. And before we finish meditating, can spread thoughts of goodwill, wishing may all beings all around everywhere be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can make the mind infinite, can make it unbounded, all the way to the ends of the universe and beyond. In every dimension, may all beings all around everywhere be happy and at ease. And can open our eyes and do a short or medium, however long it might be, Dhamma discussion for the internet. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dhammaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. So got a question from Chatta, which was a good one, and he said, Buddha mentioned in a sutta, there's a paraphrase of what he said actually, that kind of associating with good people is a cause for nibbana. Can you help us to understand more about this? So, it's a frequent theme in the Buddha's teachings that associating with good people is a cause for nibbana. And there's even one sutta in the Anguttara Nines where he lists kind of, I think 5 things, kind of, I can't remember what they all are now, that are causes for nibbana. It's like, he has energy aroused, he has faith, these kind of things. It kind of might have been the 5 faculties, he's concentrated, and those kind of things. I have to recheck that one, can't remember. But in any event, then it's part of the 9s, I think, because it goes through and then relists most of that. Actually, it might be 4 qualities. Then it relists them all with the quality that when one associates with good friends, it can be expected that one will develop this quality. And the suttas also say in another sutta that basically when a person associates with somebody that they're if they're associating with a good person, their association is like that. In other words, good people like to do good things, and so hanging around with them, one does these good things. The reason for coming together with other good people is usually to do good things. Kind of, they don't come together to do bad things, to cultivate bad qualities. And so being in a relationship with somebody like that, a kind of interacting with somebody like that, one interacts with them for the purpose of doing good things. So one takes on these good qualities. That's one way in which the good qualities of another person kind of rub off on one. It's kind of their purpose for coming together is to do that. If one goes to hang around with an inspiring monk, one's purpose in hanging around with them, and that monk will usually, or monk or nun will usually want to, if you hang around them, they're going to want to talk about the Dhamma, or they're going to want to meditate, or they're going to want to, these are the kind of things that are the purpose for coming together with somebody with those good qualities. And so associating with them, that's the basis for the association, is doing these kind of good deeds. So one comes together to do these things. So that's one reason. And another reason for that is that when one goes to stay, this is especially the case if one has a teacher. If one goes to stay with that teacher, then there's a kind of subtle way that people pick up on things that other people do, and kind of especially when one is in a subordinate position to somebody else. When one is around that person, automatically, because one's in the subordinate position, if one is a student, the other person's a teacher, then one can't just go boldly doing whatever you want. You kind of have to kind of match one's behavior to a certain extent to that teacher's to make them happy, to make them pleased, because they have this kind of power over you. It'd be the same type of thing or similar, with a boss or, basically anybody who, to whom one is in some sort of subordinate position. This doesn't mean like an absolute, like some kind of absolute thing, like there's a lower person who's always that way, a higher person who's always that way. In these positions, sometimes one is in a subordinate position, another person is in kind of position as a boss or a leader. in those kind of situations, just to kind of not rock the boat, or not to, just to kind of harmonize in this situation where one is in a subordinate position, one kind of automatically learns to adjust one's behavior to fit the culture that this leader or person in the superior, or whatever you might call it, leadership position is in. And so when one goes to stay with a teacher, this is, especially relevant for for people wanting to train on living under a kind of Arya Pugala, or living under a good monk or nun or something like this. When one goes to stay with them, then a big part of one's training is basically learning to see when one does something they don't like. Learning to pick up on their subtle cues, the subtle hints that they're giving, so that one modifies one's behavior before they have to kind of, directly tell one. And it's in this kind of learning to subtly modify one's behavior, learning to kind of intuitively gauge what that person wants, then one's thinking tends to kind of line up with that person's thinking. We're actually doing kind of figuring out the way that they think. We learn to take on this paradigm, the way that they're thinking, and mold our behavior accordingly. This kind of happens slowly and subtly, just from trying to match up, okay, wait a minute, this person likes this, they don't like that. This person likes this, they don't like that. Kind of learning the way that they do things. And trying to do this, we kind of, in a way, take on some of their thinking patterns. So if one is staying in a situation where one is a student, another person is a teacher, then just by trying to learn to live with that person harmoniously, subtly, one learns to take on their patterns of thinking, their patterns of behavior. So those are at least two ways in which kind of associating with like a person with good qualities. I think that's what the sutta, he listed the Anguttara Nikaya 61-62, associating with the good persons. It says good persons, it doesn't really say Ariyans, at least in Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. I didn't look at, didn't check out any deeper than that. But in this case, when one associates with good persons, one takes on these good qualities for at least these two reasons. One's coming together with them is like that, and also if one is in a subordinate position, then one basically learns to adjust one's thinking patterns to them. I think they might have even done psychological experiments about that, and more or less found that there are these situations in which people's even brain waves maybe match up. We kind of hang around each other for a long time, and so there's these different ways one learns to pick up on the subtle cues the teacher gives, and gradually one's thinking patterns change. This is especially emphasized in meditation traditions. A third way that associating with good people, especially in kind of monastic situations that kind of come up, is that sometimes they'll explicitly teach you. If you're hanging around, like if you go as a novice monk to stay with a senior monk, then one of the duties of that senior monk is to teach you. And sometimes very explicit. They'll give you a kind of Dhamma talk, and kind of sometimes it's more informal. You'll kind of hang around them and you'll get to hear these kind of stories from their life, especially stories about lessons they've learned, stories about their practice. And both of these forms, this formal way that they teach you and this informal way, kind of just hearing about the way they handled situations, hearing about their lessons, and sometimes the stories are very fun to hear, sometimes exciting. And hearing about these stories is another way that one kind of learns to develop wholesome qualities. Here you're getting a kind of explicit teaching from that teacher. So those are basically three ways at least three reasons, three ways that associating with good people can lead to nibbana, if you're associating with kind of monks or nuns or whoever it might be who's intent on that. Next question was, what is the cause for getting the opportunity to hang around Aryans? So for those who might not know, an Arya Pugala is somebody who's achieved at least the first stage of the Buddhist path. And at least one of the reasons for getting to hang around with them is going to be the desire to do that, the desire to meet an Arya Pugala and to hang around with them. The second cause, in line with that desire, is kind of Buddhist teaching is that one does works of merit. In other words, one creates good karma on any of the levels in which one could. And this is what helps to incline one's mind to that actual meeting. And sometimes these kind of, those meetings may happen in mysterious ways, kind of unusual ways, kind of become attracted to the potential to meet an Arya Pugala. And kind of through this desire, through this creation of good karma, those opportunities sometimes manifest. That's one way. The other way, I mean, is more explicit. Is basically one looks for a tradition. And kind of sometimes these various traditions arise in which one feels that the standards of practice of the monks and the kind of explanations of the Dhamma that these monks are giving, that these kind of explanations and standards are things which likely lead to people becoming Arya Pugalas. And one may even start to get faith that, hearing the Dhamma talks of a particular monk, that, this is, I think this monk is talking from experience, a monk or nun or whoever. I think they're speaking from experience about this. I don't think it's just book knowledge. I think from the way that they're giving examples, from the way they're describing it, that this is experience. And so through this rational way, one can also come to kind of find people who are Arya Pugalas. Although, having said that, it's actually, we'll come to this later, it's actually really difficult to tell. It's basically, it's almost impossible to tell with 100% certainty that whether somebody is or not. But one can gain confidence that this is the case. And if one actually becomes a monk or a nun, then sometimes, monks or nuns are forbidden from talking about those things directly with lay people, but not with other monks and nuns. So, so if you become a monk or a nun and you go to meet some teachers, then sometimes, not always, sometimes there'll be one of these situations that come up where it's very informal, and there's many monks around, or people might be giving them a foot massage or something, and they'll talk about, they might talk about more specific aspects of their practice, or more specific teachings that one has heard. And if that's the case, then one can get even more confidence. So wait a minute, this is something that might not be on the newspapers, but this really sounds like this person is talking from experience, and I have faith and confidence that this is the case. So in that case, one can have their kind of their rational desire to find these people confirmed. So here's the next question: how would you recognize an Ariyan in modern times? And so basically this is the thing, it's almost impossible to do. The ways that I said are ways that one can gain faith or gain confidence, but there's no, that still wouldn't be a kind of confirmation. Okay, you wouldn't just know for sure. You can have a lot of confidence or faith, in that. You kind of, oh wait a minute, this really makes sense, especially if one hangs around that person for a long time and observes them for a long time, and then one can really start to think, this is, I really think this is the case, this is really consistent. But another person might come along and feel that that's not the case. So, there's a tradition called the Thai forest tradition, and it was very famous because in Thailand at the time when this tradition arose, people thought the path to nibbana was gone, that it was no longer possible for monks to attain nibbana, or for anybody to attain nibbana. And the founder, Longpu Man, was somebody of such, or Ajahn Man, was somebody of such exceptional ability that it was kind of very obvious, his kind of attainments and his exceptional abilities, both to his followers and even to his direct monastic disciples, and even to other people he met. And he had so many direct monastic disciples who had also were rumored to be very skilled, and even when they died, some of their bones underwent this mysterious change where they turned into almost crystals, kind of like some of the relics of the Buddha or of Sariputta or Moggallana that one might see on display, kind of like little glass beads, almost, some of them. And so all these things gave people kind of confidence that, you know, these were monks who had attained the end goal, that there were many monks who had arisen recent times who had attained the end goal. But there are people who don't believe that, and kind of think, you know, it's kind of, if one goes to Thailand and can meet some of these people, have a lot of chance to discuss with them, but many people wouldn't believe that and kind of think that it's made up or is a delusion or something like that. And so there's no positive proof. Kind of, it's not like a scientific formula you can take out and prove, or you know, some kind of like a rock or a tree or something everybody can point to. It's more of a quality that person has inside. And it's even difficult for people who might have some ability to read minds or something. Even then, they can't even tell all of them with 100% certainty. So there was one story of a very well-known monk in Thailand. Maybe the most famous of these, of what they call the Kruba Ajahns, kind of monks who are known to have at least reached one stage of nibbana. And he was very well known for having finished his practice and highly regarded, and known to also have some kind of skills in reading other people's minds. And there was one time there was a group of monks who were all around with him, and you know, he was talking in this kind of informal manner we were just discussing, and he pointed at one monk, or maybe not pointed, but was discussing with one monk, and he said, "This monk is finished his practice, he doesn't have any more defilements." But that monk knew that he still did have defilements at that time. But you know, it's very difficult to tell, even for this most revered, perhaps most revered master. He couldn't tell that that monk still had defilements. His mind was so clear that they were maybe subtle. So there's actually a sutta called the Migasala Sutta, where the Buddha says, you know, it's dangerous to judge people. Kind of there's people who have these kind of wholesome roots, people who have unwholesome roots. So a person can seem to have all these really great behaviors, and then later they are subject to decline because they have an unwholesome root. There's other people who seem to have really bad behaviors, but later they're subject to rising because they have what they call this kind of wholesome root. And he says, only me or somebody like me can judge people. In other words, like only a Buddha can fully get that right, you know, every single time. For them to have confidence that you know, the behaviors that we see, the teachings that we're getting, the stories that we hear, they all lead us to think that this person is an Aryapugala. And let's see here. What is the karma to associate with an Ariyan in this life and future life? So I think that we might have touched on that already. And the last question is, can we get the full benefits without seeing an Ariyan, but listening/reading their teachings? And so no, you wouldn't. One wouldn't be able to get the full benefits just from reading teachings that somebody is giving. Or listening to their teachings, because as we mentioned in the when we first started the discussion, a big portion of staying with a skilled teacher is that one picks up on their habits in these subtle ways, picks up on their habits by molding one's behavior subtly, picks up on their habits because these are the things they like to do. If one wants to hang around with them, one does them. And one also gets even the explicit ways that they might teach are more tailored specifically to that student. They live with that student so they can tailor their teachings to him or her and give them very specific advice. Sometimes it's explicit. They'll say, this is good, this is good, this is bad. Sometimes it's more like a hint that one learns to pick up on. Sometimes it's just a kind of frown. And kind of, you know, you've done this kind of bad behavior too many times. Or good behavior. They might give kind of signs that they like the way you're going. I remember there was one monk who I really respect, and I would be very worried about these monastic rules, whether I'd broken a monastic rule. And one time I phoned him up to see if I'd broken a monastic rule, and when I called him, he just had this very angry voice on the phone. I was like, hello? I was like, what's up? Kind of
ready to, kind of let me know he was not pleased. And then I asked him the question, he answered it in like 2 minutes, and he was like, go reread this and this and this. And so I quickly got off the phone and finished. But the point that I felt he was trying to get across was, look, you're getting too worried about this kind of rule. You shouldn't be so worried. And so that was a huge help in trying to kind of overcome this worry. It was just his ability to specifically tailor these teachings to me. And he'd observed me many times doing this kind of thing, but that final time when he, I guess, waited for the right time, that was when, skilled teachers will do this, wait to the time when you've done something so obvious, then point it out to you in an indirect way. And that was kind of much easier for me to see kind of my own lack of skill in that situation. So one can't get those kind of tailor-made teachings if one doesn't have this kind of personal interaction with the teacher. You can't get that from just watching a Dhamma talk on YouTube or anything, which is still beneficial to listen, still beneficial to watch. But the difference between that and actually living with somebody is actually can be relatively large. Kind of the opportunity to learn from somebody face to face through these interactions is, one can say, much, much greater. So having said all that, it's to actually find an Arya Pugala and live with an Arya Pugala. It doesn't necessarily mean just because you found an Arya Pugala or you meet one that everything that they say might be necessarily correct for you. And kind of it's possible that it's basically only the Buddha who had the complete scope of the Dhamma. And he had the whole vision. So what he recommends all the time, especially since we can't know who is and who isn't an Arya Pugala, is that whenever somebody says something to us about the Dhamma, we compare it with the suttas and the Vinaya to see if it matches up with the suttas, matches up with the Vinaya. And if it does, then we take it on. If it doesn't, then we don't take it on. So one doesn't need to make one's whole practice or one's whole kind of quest or put too much weight on meeting an Arya Pugala. One put too much weight on having an Arya Pugala for a teacher. Of course, this would be a wonderful thing, but one still needs to have this quality of discernment about one. One still needs to have this ability to determine, one taking on a teaching that one gets from whatever source, is this working out for me? Is this going well? Is this something that's moving me in the right direction? And if one stays with a really skilled teacher, then this is actually what they point one to. Okay, if one goes to stay with an Arya Pugala, I want to teach me the way, show me where to go, show me what to do. One can have so much faith in them, and usually what they'll try to do is, they might use that for a bit, but they'll usually try to push that student back onto their own resources, kind of try to force them to find the wisdom within themselves, either through subtle means or direct means. So there was one monk who went to stay with Longtam Mahabua, who was a very skilled teacher and known to have finished his practice. And he went up to him, and he'd been studying kind of the stages of insight. And he asked him what he should do to attain nibbana. And he expected Longtam Mahabua to say, okay, do this and this and this, give him a very specific set of instructions. But what he said was, I don't know what's going to work for you. I know what worked for me. So he said, my advice to you is to kind of, at least as far as I remember, kind of paraphrasing here, observe what works and keep doing that, observe what doesn't, and don't do it. And kind of, basically, one learns to find one's own path. So at the end of the day, finding an Arya Pugala, if one can, is something wonderful. It's very difficult to do, and it won't be the end of one's search. It won't necessarily be like if one finds an Arya Pugala for a teacher, that somehow one will be on like a rocket ship towards nibbana. One can gain many benefits from hanging around skilled teachers, but always one has to have this aspect of discernment. Kind of, it's the suttas, it's the Vinaya that are the standard, no matter who one is hanging around. And one always has to have this aspect of the discernment in terms of finding if the practices one's doing if they're working for one, if they're not working for one, if one's going forward or one's not going forward. I mean, of course, an Aryapugala or a good teacher will show one things that one didn't know or didn't notice. One might have wrong ideas about the suttas and the Vinaya, which is where it's a balance. But usually these teachers will tend to point one back towards oneself, because this is where suffering and happiness arises within one's own mind. And just finding a teacher, just totally relying on them, won't be enough to eliminate. Look for the causes of dukkha, look for the causes of happiness within one's own mind, and eliminate the causes for dukkha and put in place the causes for happiness. This is when one will become more and more independent in the Buddha's teachings. And this is one of the epithets actually for an Aryapugala, or one of the ways that they're described, is somebody who's become independent of others in the Buddha's teachings. So if one meets an Aryapugala, one associates with them, ideally this is what one will be going towards independence of others, towards a knowledge of the Buddha's teachings that doesn't depend on others, that is secure within oneself. And this would be when a person becomes an Aryapugala themselves. May still have teachers, but those teachers point one back inwards. So those are some thoughts on these questions. And so I think that I'll leave that there, and hope that everybody has a great day wherever it might be, and wishing you all the best till next time.